the way I was working was more linear. I was kind of like going chronologically back and recording how I would wipe and clean plates. I would use text that talks about phenomenology, the use of the body. So the body was already there. I was wanting to understand how am I using my body in my practice? What is that connection between what I'm touching and what I am manipulating with my hands? Because the hands is actually really like it's a theme that is very present. Either that you can like really see hands in the work, or that there's some kind of hint or element that relates to touch. And I would say that this is also it's a key concept or key even like poetic trigger and phenomenological, I don't know, experience that I'm still like wanting to understand. That the moment we are touching something, we are like feeling existence on another level. Is that because it's true? This is just like, I'm not saying that this is like,
yeah, that's your.
This is not a universal truth, but
yeah.
and as I'm talking, is somehow like I'm articulating it. But it's just that is when we feel that we are in this, like materialized as humans. Let's say like the physical realm. So I started exploring that in a linear way. How am I going back, or am I talking about time, or am I talking about how through touch I articulate, or the brain is furnished through touch, for example. I mean, and there's like lots of philosophical texts, and I would be like into reading like Merleau-Ponty, and which is like complex philosophy, but that was something that was very present in my work. But then there was the project, and I go back to this one because actually I've been going back to it to understand how it has affected my practice today as I work with stones so much. But I have always been interested also in psychology, and then when I did the Cuban Kevat project for the graduation show, I did a project about the lithographic process and similarities or parallelisms that I was establishing between the psyche, how an image, or the idea of imago in Latin, that is engraved, let's call it brain, human soul, both, and what happens on the lithographic process, because stones seem to be inert, insensitive, like frozen in time, but actually is that their time is different to ours. But the lithographic process, stones are extremely sensitive, like what happens also with the brain. And I established like, I created some kind of walk around the stages of image. There's like the potential image, meaning what can become before it happens, the virtual image when it already becomes an idea, and then the embodied image when it has really materialized. But I was working with stones, and then at the same time understanding a psychological process. And I can see that nowadays I don't follow that linear narratives or such a organized order. But what I do is a consequence of that, where it has turned into materials and things that crystallize, melt, break, or that they were stone, and then now it's something metallic, but then there's a liquid so meaning like talking about chemistry or alchemy, but that actually this is also happening within our bodies in a different way, but it's also happening in our minds, it's happening on a psychological level. And actually alchemy, they call it as like the mother of all the sciences, where then philosophy, psychology, chemistry, physics, everything has emanated from there. And even
philosophy came before alchemy.
Well, as well, yes. But Yes, no, you're right with that. But meaning that, but it was let's say, I'm translating from Spanish, but it was influenced by that as well. Yeah, yeah. And probably like philosophy is just like the mother of everything. Like asking questions about life and why we're here. But talking about like a practical aspect or use of alchemy, but that you can also talk about alchemy in metaphysical terms. It has just made me understand that is something very similar that I was explaining, like through this other example of a project where it was the lithographic process on the one hand, and then this understanding of psychology on the other hand, how images, because we also work through images, like our psyche is also there are imprints that are in the brain or even in the body that can never be removed because are just part of our history. And then basically that is what I'm interested in this idea of what is an imprint or scar, mark, trace that has been left behind, that is the beginning of everything. And that is the same as talking about matrix, because that's the concept that you use on a daily basis.
Printmaking
matrix, not matrix, the film. Exactly. Yeah. But it's a very good like also name for a movie, because it's really like going to that core origin, and that is what has also maybe going back to the original, the very first question, like if I have been working with this, like searching for the origins and such a like primitive things, how it can be wanted to see the cave paintings or rock art or working with fossils, but it has just been like a consequence of keep on researching in this direction, and it has just led me to these places.